son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, welcome back. It is once again the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. I'm super excited to have second-time returning guest here to tell us about his new book, Nazis of Long Island, Sedition, Espionage, and the Plot Against America. Please welcome back to the show, author Christopher Verga. Welcome back, sir. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me again.
No, I've been patiently waiting. It was about a year ago when I had you on for the last episode. That was kind of touching on the Nazi stuff, but more kind of focused on Cold War. You're the relative expert on the war production and definitely the espionage layer of what's been going on in Long Island for the past 75 years. At what point did you know that the Nazi stuff had to be its own book?
I'm going to go with just my basic research of just Googling a bunch of ProQuest news articles, and it was just like pulling a thread, essentially, on a sweater, and there was no more sweater left. So, I didn't realize how deep it was. I thought it was just a couple of outliers, like that guy in Merrick we spoke about last time, who actually shared Sperry's bomb sites and autopilot with the Nazis, which was put in the Luftwaffe. I thought that was just an outlier. But then I realized how much more in depth it was with the spy network. You had people taking notes on boats coming in and out of the ports of New York City. They were reporting back to Nazi handlers who actually had U-boats hanging off the coast ready to blow them up. So it was just... I was just floored and amazed for about 3 hours of just digging. And I'm like, okay, this got to be a book.
Well, and I'm interested too, like what, obviously there's a lot more documentation in terms of the Cold War stuff because there was just more media and more awareness of that then. When I was looking into a lot of the Nazi stuff, it kind of felt like the powers that be were aware, but they wanted to kind of keep wraps on it to not freak people out or make people realize the threat was a little bit closer. You know, how do you go about researching stuff, A, that happened this long ago, and B, was deliberately kind of quashed so people wouldn't get upset about it?
So there was a media blackout during World War II. They wanted to keep morale up, so media was censored for the most part. So what came in and out was very limited. Local news kind of fell under the radar for a lot of that censorship, but it was toned down a lot. So a lot of the stuff I got was through the FBIvault.com, which is all the declassified FBI files, and also the Blickstein files of un-American activities, the whole house record of it, which was pretty in-depth. It's like 1,500 pages.
Oh, wow.
Once again, this is where I got the stuff. So all I needed was just a mention of Nazi saboteur rings and just a mention of German-American Boone Nazi day camps or whatever. Just a mention. And I just put in the FBIvault.com. I got the House of Un-American Activities, the Blickstein files they refer to. And I just told the rest of the story. And even Thomas Dewey, Governor Thomas Dewey, I went through his records as well. And for the most part, this kept them up at night. This whole fiasco with the Nazis here, not just the spy rings, but them having parade grounds and arming in the backwoods of Long Island and even upstate New York. So LaGuardia papers, I found a lot of this stuff in. And, it was crazy because once you write something like this and once you publish it, people come into their own narratives and their own stories. And the stories that are handed down, especially with the German POW camps. And, I wish I were there when I was writing the book, though. It would have been so much more in depth.
Well, I guess that would be kind of my next question. So, like, as this story can kind of come to light a little bit more in modern times, I mean, I've run into the same thing. Like, I'll tell people about the stuff that I found about Nazis in Long Island just on my like surface level research, and most of them can't believe it. I'm kind of interested in like the people that came forward afterward. Was there stuff that you really would have like fleshed out your story more, or was it just like completely divergent? You know, this for context, and people who watch this show will know this, but there was a Nazi summer camp. It was like it was right next to where Brookhaven National Labs is now. It's called Camp Siegfried, and that was a very big community of pro-Nazi Americans. Those people didn't move away. So like what stuff have you heard since you've put this book out, since you're trying to bring this story to light, where people have kind of come back and been like, oh yeah, well, I know. I was telling my mom as I was looking into a lot of these things, and she grew up in Sparta, New Jersey. And she was like, oh yeah, that's right down the street from, I think it was Camp Nordland, but it was the same thing. It was like a Jersey. So like what other stuff popped up as soon as you start putting it out in the world that you're interested in this? What stuff popped up?
Once again, I can't stress enough to you on, I wish I knew a lot of this stuff when I was writing the book.
Yeah, sure.
Because then when you look back at it, you're like, but going back to this, I was doing a lecture in a public library about the book, and there was an older gentleman who said, hey, I remember when my grandparents used to actually lease out the German POWs, and some of them were in internment camps. I'm like, I'd like to speak to you after the lecture. And this guy gave me a whole narrative of how the internment camps that they had, which were pretty much, they were German American Boon affiliated, et cetera, they were put in there because they were a threat to the war effort. They were leased out to do work for the farms. And he was just giving me a more personal story about this.
Yeah.
Even the POW camps in general, there was like 15 to 62-year-olds in a lot of these German POW camps that we had on Long Island. And they were picking potatoes. And a lot of them would just share that personal stories with Hitler and Nazism, essentially, and how they were lied to and how they were going through a battle with misinformation as well. So something like that would have gave a more of a depth and more of a layer. I did get a chance to put this together in an article for Newsday, so I was very excited about that, but it still just scratches the surface. Okay, so dig on it a little more. I actually tracked down some of the descendants of these POW camps, the Nazis that were had there. Some of them actually made their way back to Long Island and opened up businesses. And now they're multi-generational businesses. I couldn't put them in the book. I couldn't put them in the Newsday article for obvious reasons. One of them has a contract with Northwell, which was Long Island Jewish, so I could tell you why. That they all agreed that Nazism is wrong. They all agreed that they were hoodwinked. They all agreed that it was a cult. So, I don't want the crimes of their grandfather being paid for by their great-grandkids, Yeah. So that's one reason why I left some of those names out in my Newsday article. But, just speaking to those families, like there was one case of a guy who was actually a fascist Italian POW held in these camps, which makes it even crazier. And he fell in love with a local woman who was working in the camp. And she petitioned and fought with him, so she fought with the state to marry him, to bring him back to Long Island. It was kind of like a reverse Mary the Blood situation for him. He opened up a business when he came here too. And once again, I can't mention that business, but it was a pretty lucrative business. And it took generations to build. And, you can't just throw fascists and Nazis around when, names, because you don't want to destroy those businesses.
Sure.
For those people. But, stuff like that gave it even more depth. When you talk about the information wars was something I really, really wish I hit on more in the book. How America combated misinformation, how the Nazis promoted misinformation. And there's another thing I realized later on. Lawrence Dennis, who actually wrote for Reader's Digest, who wrote all this Nazi propaganda, who was paid for by the Nazi government. Now, this gets a little wacky. He was actually half black, and he was passing his white, and he was a full supporter of the Nazi cause. So I didn't put in the book because I found that out after. It's amazing, and I found that through an archive, Columbia Archives, and I didn't even think of looking there. So these are little details that you find out that could further build up the book. You left out because you didn't know. So, yeah.
Do you think you'll end up doing like a second edition or a follow-up to this?
I don't know. It's getting pretty close. Definitely something with the German POW camp that was here. I got way too much information on that. A lot of the German POWs that were held here in Camp Upton, which is now Brookhaven Labs, like you mentioned before, were actually buried in Pine Lawn National Cemetery next to World War II veterans.
Wow.
We actually flipped them on the battlefield in Section 2C. So I might be doing something a little later because I even reached out to some of those descendants in Germany to try to get a better story. So that might be in the works, so stay tuned on that.
Love that. One of the things that has always kind of like, it took me a while to understand the scope here. I understand that because Long Island is what it is, arsenal democracy, of course, there are going to be some spies there. Like that's a foregone conclusion, but to see the scope, to understand the scope, and even just thinking like Camp Siegfried is not the only one in the tri-state area. I'm just wondering, like, what are your thoughts in terms of how big this was? And also acknowledging, like, we don't know all the stories. You were able to find a lot of the stuff that became public, but let's just assume this is stuff that's happening at the highest level of military and secrecy. What do you think is like the real scope of how entrenched they were in Long Island? Like full-blown 100% Nazis.
I think it's more about how entrenched they were in the United States. I think that's the question right there. It was very, 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 very entrenched. Every industry that was a defense contractor had at least 3 Boone members working there. So this was a real concern.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. The only one that really was on point, and I want to give them credit, was Grumman's. Grumman's had their own police within the company. Because they didn't just trust the FBI. They're like, okay, now we need another layer of security. We want to make sure our folding wings for the Hellcat or the Wildcat is not going back to the Nazis or the Japanese, et cetera, or the bomb sites on the Avenger are not going back to the Nazis. So I will say, to Grumman's credit, the furthest someone got to actually leaking information was a bus driver for the workers. And that bus driver also worked for Republic as well. And he used to ask all these questions to the defense plant members, but they were all trained to shut up. But I will say Grumman's by far, and once again, it could have been a leak, by far had like zero on leaks. Bristol Aviation was really bad. They were just giving the planes away to the Nazis at that point. That was horrible. That's probably the worst on security leaks. But once again, all this, Long Island, 1 in 7 people are Klan members. So if someone comes with a Nazi ideology, it's very compatible, for people to adapt. It's kind of easy. In addition to this, you got a lot of misinformation. With the Ford dealerships, they're giving out protocols to the Elders of Zion, the crazy
the anti-Semitic
conspiracy theory stuff. You could get it at a Ford dealership. Ford was very common. So you got these isolated areas. You're buying a new Ford, you just happen to get a copy of the Protocol of the Elders of Zion to go with your new Ford, and this is your reader material. That's printed everywhere in every newspaper that Henry Ford was affiliated with. Believe it or not, that's quite a bit. In addition to that, you got elected officials such as Hamilton Fish. Now, Hamilton Fish, his family is a political dynasty. He's the least likely to be affiliated with the Nazis. Hamilton Fish, he comes from a generation of New York State governors, Revolutionary War heroes, and this guy, prior to the Nazis, he led the fighting. He led the Harlem Hellfighters into battle and advocated for integration of military service, of military branches.
This guy, right, Hamilton Fish?
Hamilton. Hang on for a second. Nope, the other guy before him. I forgot which one. There's quite a few. That's the one. Yeah, he got voted out of office. Hamilton Fish III.
Wow.
Yeah. So Hamilton Fish III, he created the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, talked about creating a homeland for the Jewish people after Iran with the Balfour Declaration. And then all of a sudden around the early 30s, he somehow did a 180 and became a Nazi. It's like, really? Like, this guy was pretty progressive for his time. And all of a sudden, he did a full circle. And he was actually infiltrated by a lot of the Nazis. He was sending franked mail, which means they had his congressional stamp to everyone in his congressional district, which was Hitler's speeches translated in English, Goebbels stuff translated in English, Mussolini stuff translated in English, very random stuff going to thousands and thousands and thousands of people within his district. And once again, some people turned Nazi and they didn't even expect it. Hamilton Fish III was the best example. And then you got General Nye, you got all these other people coming out of the woodwork, respected elected officials, saying we got to remain isolationists, Hitler's really not too bad. And, people took it hook, line, and sinker. And there was people that could not be fooled. And those people that could not be fooled were on the right side of history. So the Nazis embedding themselves was quite easy to do, especially when Hitler sent in $3 million for propaganda efforts in various countries. So
Right.
it's coming through Reader's Digest, which is one of the most widely circulated periodicals that we have in America at the time. It's coming through a magazine called Social Justice with Father Colligan, which was like, he's an anti-Semite, he's a jerk. But once again, that had a distribution of 1 million people.
Yeah.
So it's coming from every end. And even the airwaves, you have like these mock radio shows promoting crazy conspiracies and rumors, and people are taking it hook, line, and sinker. And also, let's look at the context here. We're coming out from World War I. So they ran across Long Island and Tri-State Area, New York, lost about 3 people in their community from World War I. Right? In addition to that, we're coming out of one of the worst pandemics ever, which you did have lockdowns on. People forget that the flu pandemic that we had in 1919, 1921, there was no lockdown. There was lockdowns. They did close schools. It happened. You had lockdowns, people wore masks, and from that, you're getting a lot of crazy crackpot conspiracies coming from that lockdown.
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
As it does. Yeah, if you know, around 12%, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, right?
Yeah.
Make it through, and then that, the conspiracy theories, you got the desire for isolationism, and then you also have a big, massive influx of immigrants coming here, which is changing demographics, and people are getting angered about
Pissed
that.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also sounds familiar.
Yeah. And one of these immigrants, of course, my family, the Italians and Sicilians, they're saying that they're creating crime in America, et cetera, et cetera. There's like 10 of them in a room, and yes, my grandfather came over. There was about 15 in a room. It's the same thing, and it became a breeding ground for literally the Nazis, hook, line, and sinker, building in the community, and it just filled in a vacuum. And that's how they got so ingrained. And, though the economy was in the upswing, people are still complaining about stalled economic progress. So, once again, this became the perfect storm.
Yeah. Just creates the perfect chasm for people to latch on to an enemy, somebody to put a scapegoat, to put their problems on. Again, it's just like, it sounds so familiar. The Long Island, I had Mark Torres on here. He actually reached out to me after he saw your episode, and he kind of put me onto the whole eugenics angle. And I also, in researching a lot of the Cold War stuff, I kind of found that there was a pretty deep Germanic history, like Germanic Methodists, like old, well before World War I even. Does that play in at all? Do you think that played in at all to getting people to who come from Germanic heritage would they be a little more susceptible? Because the whole area all around Grumman, that was historically German farmers. I mean, even Grumman is Grubmann. That's a German name, right? But they were notoriously buttoned up. And obviously literally the most intense aerospace stuff that was going on at that time, well into the Cold War, was happening there. So that there was the incentive to it was very pro-American in that plant for sure. But do you think like the Germanic roots play at all into like why this pocket of people were so susceptible? Camp Siegfried is just like this hilarious anomaly to me. It's like, this thing existing even out in the open before we were first declaring war against the Nazis. It's just like, how does it even build to that? How did the surrounding people, how are they okay with that?
Well, I just want to unpack this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
So, first of all, not all Germans were like hook, line, and sinker for Nazism. They didn't all go Nazi. There was a lot of German groups, German beer drinking groups, of course, that were actually very anti-Nazi. They supported Democrat society, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, they still had their gripes about World War I still, but they were far from going Nazi. Was there a connection to going German American Boon population, German populations? Yeah, of course. Look at Lindenhurst. They called it Breslin. A lot of people saw it as German nationalism, but as time went on, as Hitler took power and some of these atrocities were coming to fruition, like going into World War II, not the Holocaust yet, just World War II, there was a lot of people that fell off and started going the other camp. But some of the people, like a cult, were so ingrained, they weren't going anywhere. Yeah. And I don't want to put it all on the German population, but yeah, it probably was fed more through a lot of the German population, but not the whole German population. I just want to be clear about that. And, there's a lot of patriotic Germans, like you said, the Grumman's family, what would we be without Grumman's?
It'd be very different. The landscape would be very different.
Yeah, we'll be like, no offense to people upstate, we'll be the Troy, New York of New York.
Well, we wouldn't have made it to the moon. We debatably would not have won World War II. Like that's what I mean to say by that what was getting pumped out of that facility was decidedly pro-American. They were really propelling us forward.
Yeah, of course. It was very pro-American. Even when you look at Republic, it had, though it had its leaks, it was very pro-American too. The person that started Republic, one of the founders, was a Ukrainian who left Tsarist Russia, with a dream. And look what he created, Once again, I'm subjective. I like the P-47 Thunderbolt, more than Gremlins. Of course, my grandma worked on them. That's why, and I remember these great stories growing up. I'm sure Gremlins knew the better planes, whatever. It's part of the American dream. It's part of the American fabric, That's why we have Republic and Gremlins, So there was that patriotic idealism that created them. But at the same time, you had this undertone of Nazism that is counter to that.
So we were kind of touching on it before. Like my mom was growing up. This was well after World War II, and there was just like this thing that her community knew: you don't go up to the hill, and that was like a euphemism for that's where like the Nazis that remained from whatever that camp was, they're still up there and active. And there's a part of me that can't help but like kind of extrapolate that across America when you look at later in the 90s, 80s and 90s when you get like the rise of a new like white nationalism, pro-Nazi sentiment. Are these holdouts from that time, or is that like a whole new wave? Does this stuff really get squashed going into World War II and coming out of World War II?
Okay, so the German American Bund became later on Camp Siegfried. It became the German American Settlement. So, and then in 2014,
German Gardens.
You had a lawsuit that said, guess what? People that are not German can buy into this community. So did it really get squashed? No. They kind of got saying from the greater community. And even when we look at the German American Bund and all these anti-American pro-fascist groups, what did they become later on? The American Renaissance Party, which is fashioned from the Fourth Reich that wants to be in America. And that was established in Rockville, New York, And then from the American Renaissance Party, you got a theme that goes all the way from ultra far-right conservative groups. And, and that stems from white nationalism. Did they go away? No, it didn't go away. It evolved, essentially. Yeah. I teach politics of terrorism in John Jay College. And, it just doesn't go away. Fighting terrorism and fighting these anti-government groups is like taking a baseball bat and smacking it into a wasp nest,
Right.
There is no real effective way. I wish I could tell you there is an effective way. I hope there's an effective way. I am strongly anti-freaking white supremacist. My wife's black. My cousin mixed race. I can't tell you how much this stuff is disgusting. But I mean, how it evolves. And that's where we're at right now. Can we make it an outlier? I think that's the best way, to push it on the outlier of society. But, no, it evolves. And just like Camp Siegfried, which became the German-American settlement, it evolved. And, even when you Google some of those old newspapers from 2014, hearing people defend that that you can only sell to Germans is hilarious.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And what's funny? Everywhere around them, that property value, that German-American bond community, German Gardens or German-American settlement, and they renamed it 50 times, their property value was 40% less than the outer area because of their stupid racial clause.
Yeah, sure.
You know something? Say you are racist, okay? Everyone loves money, right? Economically, you should be like, okay, fiscally speaking, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You got a house in Yapping down the road that's going for about $400,000 when they can't get rid of a house for $225,000, because of that racial clause. So their own racism was making them go bankrupt, and they still held on to it. That's a true believer.
Yeah, it's real commitment. Real stupid commitment right there.
That is. Don't really net worth of my value. I would love to do that. Who wouldn't? But no, they want to stick right on to that,
I grew up in the Midwest, and I remember learning about some of this as it applies to the Midwest. At least in Nebraska, where I grew up, there were large Germanic and Polish populations. That's where a lot of folks ended up when they immigrated to the United States. Very big Polish and German populations there. And one of the, I think they may still be, but it's the largest distributor of Nazi propaganda. He lives in Lincoln or right outside Lincoln in Nebraska. He's the biggest distributor of modern day Nazi propaganda in America. And it's wild. I know there was another camp up in Wisconsin. But it's just, it kind of melts my brain. Like the more I start looking at it and zooming out, even just finding the few other camps that were up in this area, there was another one called Camp Nordland. And that was in a town in upstate New York that had a German language newspaper called Sullivan Volksblatt until very surprisingly recently. And they still have roads called Führer Road and Swiss Hill. It's crazy. It's even after the fact, Swiss Hill, maybe that's ambiguous enough, but Führer Road, even in 2025, it's what? How is this okay?
No, that's crazy. They still have those relics. Once again, Swiss Hill sounds cute.
Right. That's can that'll pass. But Führer Road,
really? that doesn't pass the test. Führer Road. What Führer means? You got to live a
bridge too far
to figure that one out. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but this is why we should know our history. So we don't repeat stuff like this, and we have historical awareness about stuff like this. We need historical awareness, essentially. If you want to go forward, you need historical awareness. And this is why. Look how close we are. Look how close we were to be overthrown. Once again, the German-American Bund, going back to them, they were a paramilitary group. They weren't just a crazy bunch of groups of Nazis in a backwoods screaming at the clouds in the sky.
They were preparing.
What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They were preparing.
They were prepared. They were prepared for that talk, that day. They were prepared for it. They had guns. They were stemmed the NRA, National Rifle Association, to get free pistol training, and also get discount rifles, And, this is crazy. They actually had a back channel with them. So, they're walking around with those 1920s or those vintage World War I guns hanging out in the backwoods, waiting for that talk, waiting for that moment to overthrow the United States. So, we really should be aware of these groups. We should be aware of this history so we can prevent it. And when you got a road called Theodore Road, apparently we're just doing the freaking repeat this again,
Yeah, well, I mean, the even like the eugenics angle, like having Mark on the show and explaining to me that at the Nuremberg trials, the Nazis used the eugenics occurring on Long Island as the excuse. Well, like the Americans were doing it, so we thought it was a great idea and we expanded on it. And there's like, for me, it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of deal? Like, which, and maybe there is no answer. Maybe there's no way to define that. But then it's like, it just seems strange that all of that is like in such close proximity to itself.
It is in close proximity. I just want to, go off topic one for a second. Mark's book is amazing, and whoever's listening should read it. The Eugenics of Mark Torres, Eugenics, just Google it. The title escapes me, but it's an amazing book. All your listeners should actually read that book. Mark Torres, he's amazing with his books. Do you got the full title, Ray? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I'm gonna pull that up right now.
Interrupt me. Once again, I can't advocate enough for reading that book. I was blown away, and nothing should surprise me. Look what I learned about.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Nothing should be surprising.
And the legacy of eugenics, Station of Intolerance. There we go. That's the book. He knocked it out of the park with that book. Knocked it out of the park. And I can't advocate enough for people to read it. I know we're supposed to talk about my books, but hey, a good book's a good book, And
100%, and I'm sure he won't be mad.
Well, I'm sure he'll be fine. That being said, did we create the Nazis? Well, I think we had a contribution to it. We had a contribution to the ideology. I also think it's a perfect storm at the end of the day. It's a perfect storm, because like the Nazis also call on to Nietzsche's Superman concept,
Right. Supermensch.
I don't think Nietzsche meant anything by it. Even when you talk about Camp Siegfried, it's about Prince Siegfried. They named it after the German prince who actually slayed the dragon, who was holding all the resources and holding back all the resources for Germany, put his blood on the dragon's blood on him, and brought the Germanic people to prosperity. So a lot of this is ingrained in fairy tales, and I think the eugenic stuff was the icing on the cake as well. So it was just a mixture of everything, if that makes any sense.
It does completely, yeah. It's like a perfect storm, decades in the making kind of deal.
Yeah, but the Nazis didn't come out of the thin air. There was something brewing. People just don't go Nazi. There's something under the exterior that's simmering for people to get there. It just doesn't happen in thin air. So that goes with the German-American Bund. That goes with the Nazi Party, the Renaissance Party, and all these other crazy groups that we have currently.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've watched tons of documentaries. I've read a ton on like the psychology of the Third Reich, how they use propaganda, and what particular fears they played into. And it just is so unnerving to me how not much we have changed. Like as a group of humans, like we're still very susceptible to the same very simple principles of propaganda that were being used at that time. And there's, a million examples through history post World War II where that has kind of been the case. I'm also interested, like, I don't know if this came up at all in any of your research, but talking about it being larger than Long Island, do you think any of this kind of overlaps with like the business plot or like the very small group of elite industrialists. Henry Ford is one of them, but he is one of many very powerful and wealthy industrialists, not only in Long Island, but just in the country as a whole, trying to usher in some kind of, I don't know how familiar you are with the business plot, but that's
amazing.
We've talked about that a bunch on this show. I'm just interested in your thoughts on like how Long Island is one piece of a much larger puzzle. How do you think it all kind of fits together? Was there a serious threat? Like, was democracy, was our way of life as America that much of a serious threat where at the highest levels people are trying to turn it into fascism?
So if you know about the business plot, it was protected and covered over. Schmidley Butler came out essentially to blow the horn on this. Schmidley Butler was definitely a very interesting character. A lot of his, he wrote a lot about how the business world influences the military. So
he did War is a Racket, right? That's like one of his famous.
Yeah. He talked about, I think it was about the invasion of Haiti, on how it had nothing to do with self-defense. It just had to do essentially with, not self-defense, but essentially Citibank, a national Citibank, sorry about that, getting payment on a default loan, and how the military was used in the process. If you hadn't read his stuff, I recommend it. It's a little dated, but the concepts are still there, and it's very relevant. And he's the one that blew the horn on the business plot, which was all these wealthy people coming together. They didn't want to pay Social Security, essentially, and they were trying to overthrow the government and install a quote-unquote neo-fascist type thing. Was it... Okay, let me unpack this a little bit.
Sure.
Life as a democracy/republic was under threat. We were very close to being overthrown as a country. The United States almost went fascist itself. The elected officials, the propaganda, the sedition, the espionage rings, just the people on the backrooms training for the TOG. We were almost there. We were very close to fascism. I'm going to say we were more close to being overthrown as a country with the German-American Bund and all this Nazi propaganda than we were during the businessman plot.
Yeah.
Was there businessmen collaborating on this? Probably. Were they out in the front? No.
Not. Yeah.
Just like, they're on the rocks.
Yeah.
Essentially.
In the shadows.
Yeah, in the shadows. But were we almost overthrown? Yes. Do I know how deep General Electrics and all these other companies were involved? No, not really, because just like the first businessman's plot, it was kind of kept under wraps. And, believe it or not, a lot of information is still hard to obtain. So I'll put out that, yes, I'm pretty sure there was a corporate plot to overthrow us. I just don't know all the details of it.
Yeah, and we probably will never know for a lot of the same reasons we kind of previously discussed. It would have been very damning then. It would have really disrupted morale, and even now it would disrupt morale to know that. I've committed a number of episodes doing like Nazi histories of companies. And of course, there are a lot of now major companies that have direct ties back to the Nazi regime. But it was honestly blowing my mind how many American companies. But again, it makes sense. The idea of war profiteering didn't start in World War II. That it started a long time ago. And they just, it reached a new evolution of efficiency. In the same way that it helped Henry Ford's business to be anti-Semitic. It helped his business to be friendly with the Nazis so that he could sell stuff to the Americans and the Nazis. And he wasn't the only one.
When we were invading France, following Normandy invasion of D-Day, there was a food plant operating to build Nazi weapons of war. And there was a food plant. So, and then of course you got people that found, that went around things, like Fanta soda. I'm sure you heard of Fanta soda. There was a loop around because of the embargoes for Coca-Cola. You had that on so many stills. IBM, the data processing company, once again.
The Hollerith machine. Yeah, there's a IBM. There's a whole bunch of real sinister history there for sure.
Apartheid and Nazism. Whew, talking about
Bayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just I don't know how it's still around, but you know.
Well, even like Hugo Boss, you know, people like everyone wants to buy the clothing without realizing that they also made the SS uniforms. You know,
of course.
Porsche, VW, the people's car, you know,
Yeah.
Mercedes, Neumann. Again, it's not to say that these companies are still behaving that way or aligning themselves. Like, it was the situation. They were German companies and this is what was happening. It was do this or be killed.
Yeah.
But just, you know, this is very simple Googleable history. This isn't the obscure stuff. This is the stuff that anyone can find easily.
Of course.
I saw that Carl did the forward too, which I love that. I'm interested in like, what are his thoughts? Like, obviously he's already aligned with this. He's very familiar with the Nazis that actually did make it over to Long Island. But what is his take on this particular period of time, you know, leading up to World War II and right after? Like, was he here for that? You know, like as a kid, was he experiencing that? Did he remember any of that? I'm just interested if you've spoken with him about it and what his thoughts are.
Me and Carl speak a lot. Carl's 80. He's in his early 80s, I think. Oof, I'm a bad friend. So anytime we bring this up, Carl brings up Eric Traub for Plum Island. And I don't know if I brought it up last time or when you interviewed Carl.
Just briefly. And when I talked to Carl, we spoke on that in detail.
So Eric Traub was recruiting at Camp Siegfried, and his whole thing was disease, animal disease, transmission, vehicles, how it transmits, etc., etc. He was an American who was educated here in the Rockefeller Institute, and he was in Camp Siegfried at the German-American Boone camp doing his little Nazi thing, and the German ambassadors essentially recruited him. And he got a job under Heinrich Himmler for disease transmission research. And listen, we all know what that was about, okay? He was figuring out a way to weaponize diseases. And to World War II, you got this traitor who jumped sides, right? Went to go fight for the quote-unquote Nazi Rhineland or whatever, Fatherland, whatever the hell they call it. World War II's over. Common sense, sedition, treason. Nope. Operation Paperclip, it's called. We're going to give him a house, give him a great job, nice salary with a nice pension, and send him here back to Long Island and give him his own island. Long Island, where he actually studied hoof and mouth disease. And once again, this all became a vehicle for weaponization of diseases, hoof and mouth diseases. Carl was telling me a story when he was in Plum Island when they were doing the tours. There was a scientist that held a vial like an inch big, and he said there's enough hoof and mouth disease to kill anything that ever existed on Earth. And Carl looked at the scientist, and this is what he told me. He's like, why the hell do you have that? So it was kind of like his excitedness just faded off, He's like, oh, we just have it. Right? We just happen to have a little vial that can wipe out anything that ever existed on Earth, and I'm holding it in my hand. Talk about God complex. But I was innocent at a trial as a Nazi with Operation Paperclip. And I'm all started in Camp Siegfried, doing this little Nazism match. And there we go. So Carl always hammers home on that. Operation Paperclip, Plum Island, that's his big thing right there. And to his credit, he broke that story.
Right.
He the guys when it comes to journalism. He broke the story about the tritium being leaked into the water table from that cracked reactor in Brookhaven Labs.
At BNL, yeah.
He was doing postal diving for that one. He broke the story from Plum Island. All the crazy stuff that happened that could be in the show Stranger Things. Carl broke that story. So that is the big thing when you speak to Carl. He's really big about Plum Island and the relics of Operation Paperclip.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here, too, is, I dug pretty deep on that. Eric Traub is that there's no debate. he was there, like he was doing what everyone said he was doing. Well, and even that, like, I'll tell people that and they'll say, no, that's not true. It's like, you don't have to believe me. It is certainly true. There's one other guy who was working on rocket stuff at the Gold Coast. It's like an old castle, but there aren't a lot of confirmed names. Now, this is just my speculation here. I'm going to throw this out here and see how you feel about it. In Operation Paperclip, we took about 1,600 Nazis, right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
Approximately 200 of them were Wernher von Braun's rocket team, and a lot of them ended up in Boston, in Long Island, Boston. So those are like the really hard confirmed ones. There's a few others that made it out to other facilities across the U.S., but a lot of them are still unaccounted for. And I can't help, when I look at the history and context of Long Island and the fact that there is like there were communities that would have been very receptive to Nazis being relocated. My theory is that a lot of them ended up going into stuff relating to nuclear energy, which would also stand to reason maybe a lot of them ended up on Long Island because there was so much Paul Corporation, all the nuclear stuff they were doing at Northrop.
Brookhaven National Labs.
Brookhaven National Labs, like the premier nuclear research facility in the country post-World War II. I'm just interested in, like any of the people that have come forward, especially descendants, is there any talk of like, I've spoken with one guy who grew up on Long Island, who grew up in the trades in that neighborhood that's like just south of Bethpage, the Bethpage plant. And he was telling me a bunch of stories that as he was growing up, he comes from like a German family, but there would be these wink, wink, nudge, nudge things like, oh, but we were the good Germans. We're over here now continuing our work. I'm interested if you ran into any of that kind of stuff.
Not from this book specifically. I did run into a lot of stuff with von Braun and his rocket team that did wink, wink, nudge, nudge with the good Nazis, quote unquote, from Bethpage.
Yeah.
He did a lot of work over there, lunar module. He also did work in Calverton as well. And that is pretty much what I ran into. And once again, Operation Paperclip is still pretty classified. And getting a lot of that stuff is really tough. I will say this about von Braun. We would have had the lunar module and had all that without him. We had great scientists. Kelly from Merrick was one. Once again, very working class, very Joe Sixpack-ish, very strong Irish stereotypical family. And that's probably why they took von Braun and kept him at arm's length, because he was very working class. They judged him based on, his working class roots.
Right.
We would have got there to begin with. Once again, Kelly was the guy that came up with the concept about putting a tinfoil around the modules for re-entry. The guy was a genius. He really was. Von Braun, even on the lunar module, on the tires and everything, the re-entry rockets, he did have something on, but I think we would have got there without it. My whole thing is, we brought all these Nazis here through Operation Paperclip, not because of their insight, we just don't want the Russians to have them.
Yep, exactly.
That's
hedging
what it
our
was.
bets.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't just because they were these great innovators. No, we were scared that freaking Stalin would get them and freaking outpace us. That is the only reason, because these ideas were here, they were simmering, and they were materializing. The only person we really did bring here that really did innovate horrible things is probably Anna Traub. No one was thinking about creating hoof and mouth disease that could wipe out everyone on the earth 16 times over. No one was thinking about that. No, that's not a Traub innovation. I give it that one. But once again, we brought these people over here to get them out of hands from the Russians. So when we said we brought them here and they just disappeared into the landscape, it's because we wanted to hide them.
Right.
So
right. Well, and even von Braun, like there's some evidence to suggest that at certain points he got caught sending information to his Nazi counterparts that the Russians had acquired in their Operation Paperclip. So like, that he was a double-edged sword because he was such a known figure and because when he came to America, we also reinforced that. Like Disney had the show where he's talking about the rock. Like we kind of put him on this pedestal, and he was very findable. I understand why the rest of them kind of disappear into obscurity. They get a new identity, they get a new name. And my personal reason why I think a lot of this stuff is still heavily classified is because it probably centers around nuclear. Like when you look at the stuff that is the most classified in the military, it's the nuke stuff.
Yes.
Like there's math from the 60s that is classified math because it relates to nuclear energy. So when we take these guys over, they disappear so that the Russians can't find them. That actually does make sense. But for me, the reason why we still haven't gotten names out is because a lot of them probably did nuke or nuclear energy related research that is still classified. I hope at some point in the future we get that unlocks a bit, or at least they can declassify it to the point where we can like analyze the scope of how influential were former members of the Third Reich in the years that came after, primarily the Cold War.
Yeah, you're also looking at Salazar when he was trying to create the Colbert bomb. You know, it's also the Colbert bombs, this nuclear bomb. Supposedly the Colbert bomb could be stronger than the hydrogen bomb, you know. So anyone that was working on that stuff, not just nuclear energy, the Colbert bomb and all these other bombs, well, FYI, full disclosure, the Colbert bomb did not work. Thank God, because I think a hydrogen bomb was worse enough. But yeah, we were grabbing people that knew stuff about the Colbert bomb, and all this other stuff. I think that was Salazar. So anyone that was related to weapons in general, we were taking them, and it's still declassified. You know, the Colbert bomb, you know, it doesn't work. Everything on it pretty much is declassified still. You know, thank God it doesn't work.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that it's still classified to a certain extent.
Well, I don't know about it being classified. It's perfectly fine, you know. You know, they said the Colbert bomb would be like 2 hydrogen bombs at once. You know, a hydrogen bomb burns at 21,000 degrees. That's like 3 suns. Like, Jesus Christ. You know?
Why would we need that, you know?
Yeah, we creating the sun here. Like, like, when we can drop 1 sun on you, we don't even drop 6 and 1 bomb, you know, but whatever. But that being said, yes, a lot of it is still classified for national defense. And yes, I'm going to do a shot in the dark and say vast majority of it is because of nuclear energy, hydrogen bomb stuff, bomb stuff, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of it is because of nuclear energy. And once again, we have Brookhaven Labs right here, and we experimented with so much of that stuff to see what works and doesn't work. A lot of stuff didn't. Once again, we do round by trial by error, right?
Well, and even too, like, I think I was under the impression that Manhattan Project occurred in the desert. And yes, some of it did, but not most of it. In fact, a lot of it occurred on Long Island. I mean, even looking into the Paul Corporation worked hand in hand with Wernher von Braun on the Saturn V rockets. Like they built the filtration system that helped the rocket function correctly. And as I started to zoom out, it's like, I'm thinking just in terms of the people who who understood the nuclear science, but that's just one component. There's all these other working components of an atomic bomb, many of which were designed and manufactured in Long Island, or a lot of science was done at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Y-12, you know, like there were other pockets of the country. It was a full country effort to put this thing together. It wasn't just what was going on in the desert. No,
I just want to digress for 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
You said the Manhattan Project, right? So, fun fact, when you had the Los Alamos, where they were doing the Manhattan Project, we talk about Oppenheimer, right? Well, Oppenheimer owned that property, Los Alamos, where they did the Manhattan Project. He got that property through the transaction of sales through South Saxon Avenue in Bayshore, Long Island. Because he used to vacation here as a kid, and his brother used to vacation here as a kid, and they used to be on the bed. And they had boats. He used to race on the bay right here in Bayshore, Long Island. And his parents was like, well, your brother, he has asthma, so we need a place where drier weather is. So it's Sarah State on South Saxon and by this area called Los Alamos, which later became the nuclear bomb testing facility. You can actually go to that article. I actually put that.
That is
on the news.
wild.
Yeah, that number for personal one in that one. So,
Well, and I mean, even just the Manhattan, it's called the Manhattan Project.
yeah.
And it starts because Einstein, from his home in Long Island,
Yeah,
wrote a
that's
note
what
to
he did.
FDR. It's like that was really, after talking to you and talking to Carl, there was like a good 2 weeks where my brain just hurt. Because I was like, it was like all coming together. And I was like, you mean all this shit has been happening 2 hours that way? And I had no idea. But that's the point, is to be able to have an infrastructure where you could do this stuff right so that nobody could know. And it also, when people ask me, why would there be such a strong Nazi or Soviet presence in Long Island, I have to explain to them, like, every business could be connected. Like, statistically, all they would have to do is send enough people out, and within asking 5 or 10 people, somebody would be working on something classified. Like, it is the biggest consolidation of all of those things that's also right next to, a civilian populace.
Well, this is actually interesting because in the book I described the Benson House. It was a shortwave radio station that Nazi spies was using in Wading River. And they got a double agent in there, which makes it interesting. And they were feeding them false information. And the stuff the Nazis was asking were about the building components of a bomb, the troop movements, all the stuff coming in and out of the ports, what type of car was coming in and out of the ports. There we go. Like, once again, that was just the best example, of this. And, that just tells you how significant we were and how much concerns that we had over here. Because we were not just a rural appendage of New York City. We were the inner works of the war effort for innovation and manufacturing. Once again, they always say, what do they say? The loudest person in the room is the weakest. Well, Long Island at the time was the quietest. So it just
pretty
shows
quiet.
His power right there. And, the coming and going of the boats, I can't stress that enough because we had Nazi submarines off the coast just waiting right by the mouth of New York Harbor, looking for the boats that they got information and intel on that are carrying something significant. Components to bombs, troop carriers, etc., etc. So, we were under attack. There was a war in the tri-state area that traversed Long Island all the way into Manhattan.
Well, it's like, again, it's so easy to look up this history, but Long Island, even since like the beginning of America, was like a very valuable piece of military. Like, it was very important to the military to control that. And one of Washington's first acts as president, I'm pretty sure, is to make the Montauk Lighthouse.
Yes.
Like, that was one of the first things. His Culper spy ring, the first spy ring in American history, operated all throughout Long Island because it was like, that's where, if they were going to try and infiltrate New York, they'd have to come through Long Island. So understanding what was going on in those super rural areas at the time was of crucial military importance. Like, it's always been this very important piece of the security of America, but most people just think it's like this sleepy little town. And to some extent it is, but to your point, like, that's the best cover. No one's going to expect this like wealthy, quiet area of the country to also be the arsenal of democracy.
Of course. Even when they talk about Washington, they put one of the first customs houses right there in Sag Harbor. That's at the time. But once again, they have it there because Long Island is also deep water ports, so things can come in and out even during the Revolutionary War, which makes it very significant as well. And, once again, sleepy little towns, and building on the sleepy little town thing, they use it as a cover to have Camp Hero.
Sure,
Montauk. Yeah, they made it a sleeping little fishing village.
Harbor town,
Yeah, with anti-aircraft guns sticking out of the buffs.
Yeah, no big deal. No big deal. Massive facility. Well, and even, there's like the whole conspiracy related to that place, but like that was a huge military installation. Regardless of the whole Stranger Things mythology that gets attached to it, that was a crucial military installation. And that radar tower, that was at the time, that was like hyper cutting edge technology and how they were using it.
It was very cutting edge technology, very secretive too. And I will say about the Stranger Things, I think I said on the Cold War stuff, I dug so deep to try to find something about Camp Rio. I couldn't find anything, I'm not ruling out anything at this point, but there's nothing there to align it with Stranger Things. I would love to find it because I'll set my book through the freaking New York Times bestseller. But no, I didn't find it. So it's literally got a good secret thing. Once again, it could have been a diversion too. So
I kind of think, yes, it was important, but I kind of think, like with many conspiracy theories, at least for the military's perspective, this mythos or this lore works to their advantage because it helps keep what is actually going. I mean, it's the same thing with like UFO stuff. There's so many decades of UFO stories. People were just seeing advanced aerospace that humans developed. But from the military's perspective, they don't care if people think it's UFOs, because if they think it's UFOs, they're not going to think it's some advanced technology that we developed. So whatever was going on at Montauk was serious. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, it can. I hope it can at some point connect to Stranger Things too. But
awesome.
As of right now, it's a stretch. Wishful thinking.
Speaking of UFOs, South Haven Park allegedly had a UFO crash, which is not far from Brookhaven Labs. And Grumman's came out, so and Calverton's right there, so
Well, and doesn't that? I think maybe it was you or Carl that put me onto this from that supposed UFO crash. And again, like there's this whole thread that UFOs are kind of seen frequently around nuclear facilities. The fact that it was near Brookhaven National Labs is worth noting, but also there's crazy aerospace companies on flanking every side. So like it very well could have just been an exotic airframe that we were testing.
Yes.
But wasn't this the situation where the guy from the Long Island UFO network like conspired to poison city officials with radium that they stole from Grumman?
Yes.
It's like this. I love that. It's a delightful level of ingenuity. And he wasn't even a Nazi spy.
No.
He's like, you know what? I know we can find radium somewhere around here.
Exactly. And he found it, to his credit. That was from Calverton. That had to be a lot of experimental things happen in Calverton. And that's really underrated. So I'm going to do a shot in the dark and say that was Calverton. That was coming up with something crazy. Like Gremlins, if you can imagine it, they will try to do it, and, to their credit, that's amazing. That's what makes us great, essentially, our innovative minds. Labs, I don't think they had anything to do with that crash in South Haven, I think it was more Calverton. And yes, it led to the guy from the Long Island UFO network to try to poison people with radium. That was true.
It's very fun. It's such a fun story,
Yes.
I as we're wrapping up here, this is like heavy stuff, right? These are heavy topics. This is heavy history. And I understand that it can be like overwhelming to people, but I just want to kind of like give you the floor to once again explain why you analyze this history and why this has become such an important piece of your life, is like making sure this information is documented and available for posterity.
We need historical awareness. To move forward in our society, to grow, you need historical awareness. Just because the history might be unpleasant doesn't mean you don't teach about it. We have to grow as a country so we don't repeat this stuff, or quote-unquote Martin says, have our history rhyme. We have to move forward, and we can't dodge stories like this. Once again, we said in the top of the hour during the show, this is like history repeating itself again. So this is why it's so essential. First, when you have historical awareness, you have a better understanding of your neighbor, most of all. When I did the book Ferguson Brothers Lynching, another book I did prior. It was about the communities of color across Long Island, Native American and African American communities, and why they were insular for a certain amount of time. Once again, 1 in 7 people are Klan members. That's why they were insular. When you understand your history, you understand your present event. You understand your present more in depth. So this is why we have to write about this. This is why we have to document this. The value of documenting these crazy, horrible stories of Nazis, it's great to document our achievements and our innovation through Grumman's Republic and how they beat back all the craziness around them to innovate some amazing things. Maybe that can inspire another generation. And that's why it's so important. When you go across Long Island, I'm digressing a little bit, but when you go across Long Island and look at these abandoned sites of Grumman's and Republic, these skeletal remains of something that once was there, it's so far. It's so far forgotten on what we used to do. You imagine it? We're cultic here on Long Island. I know it's hard to imagine that when the former Republic Aviation plant is now a Dave & Buster's, and
Grumman Bethpage plant is a movie studio.
A movie studio for B-rated movies. For Grumman's. But once again, I know it's hard to imagine it, but we used to have this innovation. And hopefully, with writing books like The Failed World Long Island that talks about all this innovation that we had, we can inspire another generation. And the book, Nazis of Long Island, hopefully we can inspire a generation to do it right next time around, not to freaking be influenced by propaganda, and have historical awareness of hate groups, So my books are designed to bring historical awareness and inspire a generation to, do the right thing to grow as a society, and also to know our flaws and to grow from there.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I thank you so much again for doing the show again. The book is called Nazis of Long Island, Sedition, Espionage, and the Plot Against America. I will have the links to this book and all of your books, your Amazon store with all of your books in the description below. I cannot recommend any of them enough. You've put me onto so much cool, tangible history, some of which I've even now gone out to physically visit. Your books are great. You're doing the Lord's work by documenting this stuff. And I always love having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
Folks, this has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll catch you on the next one. Please visit the links in the description below and support Chris's work, and we'll catch you on the next one. See y'all.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.